All around the world, people are becoming increasingly concerned about misinformation and deliberate lies being spread as a way to undermine both the existing political and public order. The largely deregulated internet, especially social media, has been the perfect vehicle to allow both individuals and enemy states to spread such misinformation. But the use of propaganda and the conspiracy theories that it has spawned have been around for centuries. We should remember that in the medieval period especially, there was a great deal of superstition and fear, and conspiracy theories can be incredibly comforting because they help people to understand the world around them and make sense of events out of their control. Let's travel back in time now to the Middle Ages to take a look at vicious rumours, religious scapegoats, and some political fake news. Welcome to Medieval Madness. Independent women. Medieval England just loved a bit of fake news about queens. Many of them were powerful and rich women in their own right, often coming from foreign lands, making them the perfect target for rumour, gossip and slander. Female, rich and foreign, coming over here and marrying our kings, how dare they? Joan of Navarre, Duchess of Brittany and French wife of Henry IV, was said to have a court full of foreign spies. But that was only after her husband died and she was left as stepmother to the new King Henry V. Given an influential position at court, Joan acted as Henry's regent in his absence when he went off to France in 1415 and won his famous victory at the Battle of Agincourt. A fact that didn't go down well with her political enemies, who soon started the vicious rumours about her plots and schemes, quote, "for the death and destruction of our said Lord the King, in the most evil and terrible manner imaginable." Another conspiracy theory that became popular in the Middle Ages was the belief that certain women used sorcery and witchcraft to advance their rise to power. In 1464, King Edward IV shocked his English courtiers when he decided to marry Elizabeth Woodville, a middle-ranking widow, instead of a foreign princess. Elizabeth, who was described as the most beautiful woman in the British Isles, now suddenly had the, quote, "heavy-lidded eyes of a dragon." Her status as a commoner led to her actions as a queen being seen as disrespectful and arrogant. When her husband died, she was accused of witchcraft and their children were declared illegitimate so that her brother-in-law Richard III could take the throne. It's important to remember that the medievals did not hang witches, they hanged women. To the victor the spoils. Speaking of the infamous Richard III, one woman who became the perfect foil for a piece of fake news that has often been accepted as historical fact was Anne Neville, his wife. As we reach the end of the Wars of the Roses, a real Game of Thrones, in 1485, Henry Tudor has defeated the wicked Richard at Bosworth to become King Henry VII. At least that's the story that the Tudor dynasty liked to put about. The English historian John Roos wrote a book for his new boss, Henry, titled The History of the Kings of England. In it, he described Henry as a good king who, quote, "will be remembered for generations to come." As for Richard, Roos stated that he was a freak who was in his mother's womb for 2 years and was therefore born with teeth and shoulder-length hair, his body distorted. But in the Roos role written during Richard's reign, Roos referred to his then boss as a good lord and a mighty prince. Although later he also accuses Richard of murdering several people, among them his wife Anne. The actual cause of her death is unknown, although it was likely tuberculosis, but the rumours soon started that Richard had poisoned her so that he could marry his niece Elizabeth of York, a popular girl who ended up married to the Lancastrian Henry VII in a bid to bring the two houses together. By the time Shakespeare was writing his tragedy of Richard III for his Elizabeth Tudor audience, Richard's appearance and wicked deeds had become accepted as historical fact. It would seem we should never believe a historian who is writing a piece to please the people who pay his wages. The Double Bluff. Another English king that became the subject of a conspiracy theory was Richard II. He was usurped by his cousin, who became King Henry IV, also known as Henry Bolingbroke. Richard, who was only 10 years old when he succeeded to the throne in 1377, wasn't, by all accounts, very good at his job. After being kept prisoner by Henry, Richard is thought to have been starved to death in Pontefract Castle. Soon a rumour began to circulate claiming that Richard was alive and about to reclaim the throne. Henry knew full well that his cousin was dead, but because he recognised that the conspiracy theory could be even more damaging than the truth, Henry prosecuted many of the rumour mongers to stop the fake news from spreading. Scotland knew that the rumour was a gift too good to ignore, and they produced Thomas Ward, an imposter, who they claimed was the real Richard II. After all, a weakened England meant that an invasion over the border was less likely. In a deliberate attempt to weaken their enemy, the Scots spread disinformation. Something in the water. Across medieval Europe, the official policy of the Catholic Church was to protect Jews, in part because Jesus was Jewish. However, when the Black Death first reached Europe in 1348, Jews were used as scapegoats and false accusations were made that they had deliberately caused the disease by poisoning wells. In Europe, at a time full of religious fanaticism, ignorance, and superstition, a mysterious plague was always going to be connected with God's wrath. But why would God be angry with the medievals? Well, there could be several reasons: the constant warring between England and France, or the constant fighting all over Europe for that matter. The Germans and Italians were always at one another's throats, as were the papal states of Sicily and Naples. Others believed that the plague was sent as a punishment for not defending the Holy Land well enough against the Muslim infidel. It was quite obvious at this point that the Christians were never going to be able to reclaim the Kingdom of Jerusalem from the Ottoman Empire. Then a new idea came to light. What if it was because they had allowed Jews to live among them and had been permitted to practice their religion? Maybe the Jews had caused the illness because they were poisoning the water supply. Well, according to the Christians, Jews were dying at only half the rate as they weren't using the communal wells located in towns and cities. But why would the Jews want to kill all of the Christians? Well, simply because they were doing the devil's work and took great delight in destroying the Christ worshippers. Sadly, in a time of great fear, everybody was looking for someone to blame, and prejudices that were already well established thrived. The first Jewish massacre with a direct link to the plague started in Toulon in 1348 when the Jewish court was raided and 40 Jews were murdered in their homes. As the Black Death reached its height in April and May of 1348, other pogroms took place. By the following year, all of Europe was involved in the persecutions and massacres. In Erfurt, somewhere between 100 and 3,000 people were killed, the survivors expelled. This was followed by further atrocities in Basel, Zurich, Flanders, and Aragon in Spain. In Strasbourg, Valentine's Day of 1349 saw the burning of around 2,000 Jews, and so it went on throughout the plague-affected cities until in 1350, as the plague waned, so did the violence. Missing time. We thought it would be interesting to finish on a more modern day conspiracy theory that, although it concerns the Middle Ages, didn't pop up until 1991. Herbert Illig first asserted the theory, which claims that the Holy Roman Emperor Otto III and Pope Sylvester II, it's also possible that Byzantine Emperor Constantine VII was involved as well, fabricated the Anno Domini dating system retrospectively, that is, after the fact, so that they would be at the centre of the special year 1000 AD, and so they could rewrite history and legitimize Otto's claim to the Roman Empire. Essentially, what they did was push the calendar forward 297 years to reach 1000 AD, because the date was exactly 1000 years after the birth of Christ, and that would help them to strengthen their reigns and give them a special place in history. Then they made up a load of stuff adding fictional people and events and rewrote the history books. As proof of this conspiracy, Illig claimed that there was a lack of archaeological evidence dating from 614 to 911 AD, meaning that medieval historians relied on written sources too much. As we have seen, historians can be extremely unreliable narrators. Not YouTube historians though. Illig also claims that Romanesque architecture is present in 10th century Western Europe, and that suggests that the Roman era was not as long ago as we are led to believe. Illig said that when the Julian calendar was reformed to the Gregorian calendar in 1582, 10 days were removed when actually it should have been 13 days that were taken away if the period from the start of the Julian solar calendar in 45 BC was correctly counted. It is this 3-day anomaly, he says, that corresponds to the 3 phantom centuries. Strap yourself in for what I'm about to tell you. This means that we are actually now living in the 1700s, as there is a 300-year chunk of history that is completely fictitious. And if true, the theory means that there are a lot of historical events and figures that never existed, including Alfred the Great, the Holy Roman Emperor Charlemagne, the Viking invasion of England, and the Tang Dynasty in China, to name a few. The sketchy amount of history that covers the time period could explain why the early medieval period was known as the Dark Ages, and why during that time there were hardly any significant cultural or scientific developments, and why hardly any literature from the Dark Ages has survived. It's also true that we don't have any idea about the power of the European Church in the early period, although we do know how it ruled every aspect of life later. With no books and no mechanical clocks, is it possible that 2 emperors and a pope could have deceived millions of people? Well, in general, the answer is of course no, and modern historians have dismissed the theory as pseudo-history for several reasons. One major flaw being its Eurocentrism, as there are continuous historical records covering the period in question from other civilizations. However, there are works from earlier 18th century scholars like Joseph Scaliger and Dionysius Petavius who studied ancient systems of chronology, and Jean Hardouin who questioned the authenticity of the dates on medieval documents and church writings that also point to this theory. It would seem that although today technology may be the means by which misinformation is quickly spread, conspiracy theories have been quite common throughout history. Even before the internet, in fact even before the printing press was invented, fake news was being broadcast around the world. Today we live in an age of mistrust, and academics and historians have an important part to play in pointing out the unbiased truth. Because the conspiracy theories that we are living with today are certainly not the first, and will definitely not be the last. Thank you so much for watching this episode of Medieval Madness. Please let us know in the comments down below if there's any medieval conspiracy theories that we missed off this list. And if you enjoyed this video, then you could really help us out by subscribing, as we do release a new video every Friday. So until next time, I hope everyone has an amazing week. Cheers!